What's up, everybody? Coach Daisha here, bringing you this week's hot topic. And this one goes along with the topic that I just love to make sure that I harp on you guys on all the time, and that's form and technique. So, a lot of times I get questions about the spine, like what are we supposed to be doing with our spine in certain movements? When are we doing neutral spine? When are we flattening the back, et cetera, et cetera? So I want to kind of define those two terms and then show you the movements where you're going to be practicing neutral spine versus the whole flat back concept, okay? So let's get started. So first, let's discuss neutral spine. Neutral spine is just that. There's a reason we use neutral in there. It's the way your spine would naturally sit or curve when you're doing nothing with it, okay? So for a lot of times, we're going to look at somebody either from the side or from the back to see what neutral spine looks like for them. So if I turn to the side, arms down to my side, and stand up as tall as I can. So I'm not overarching. I'm not letting myself kind of round into bad posture. I'm just standing as tall as I can. If you were to look at my cervical area, the thoracic, and my lumbar area, those areas are going to have natural curves to them. So without me doing anything else, I am standing in a neutral spine position right now, okay? From what we call anatomical position, with arms by your side and palms facing forward and standing as nice and tall as I can, I am in a neutral spine. So a lot of times we use this position when we're looking for somebody's alignment. We're checking to see where their neck lies. Is it too far forward? Is it too far back? What are the shoulders doing? Are they rounding? Are they more back? Do we have an excessive curve here in the lumbar area, which we call lordosis, et cetera, et cetera. When you look at somebody from the side and when you look at somebody from the back, you can start to see where their natural curves are, okay? So some people are going to have what we call lordosis, so an excessive curvature in the lumbar area. Some people might have kyphosis, where they have more of an excessive curvature in the thoracic area. And a lot of times we call that humpback position, okay? And then some people have scoliosis, where you're actually going to look at that from the back, where you can see that, almost like that S curve, where that curvature is happening laterally or towards the side of the body. Doesn't matter, because for most of us, everybody's neutral spine is going to look different because we're all individuals, okay? But neutral spine is just that, where you're not making any excessive curvatures in either of the areas of the vertebrae, whether it's the cervical area, the thoracic, or the lumbar. Now, for osteoporosis and osteopenia, we have certain movements that we love to encourage you to do on a regular basis. For almost all of those movements, whether it's a squat, whether it's a deadlift, whether it's an overhead press, or even a plank, whether you're doing that plank from the wall or from the ground, we're going to encourage you to maintain a neutral spine position, all right? So neutral spine meaning that we're not going to overly exaggerate the curvature for most of these movements in the lumbar area, okay? So let's take that deadlift, for example, which I've shown you before. I like for people to pretend that there's a rod going through their pelvis from one end out the other, and we're going to be hinging where that rod is going. So a deadlift is a hip hinge position. We're not hinging way up here by our belly button and hinging from the waist. We're hinging from the hips. So even in this position, I'm not going to over exaggerate the curvature of my lumbar spine. I'm not going to be going like this into my deadlift, and I'm not going to be sticking my booty up in the air, right, to do the deadlift either. I'm going to simply contract my abdominals and maintain my normal curvature in my lumbar spine as I hinge at the hips to do my deadlift, okay? Same thing goes for a squat. I'm not going to over exaggerate that arch there. I'm going to keep my feet hip widths apart. I'm going to unlock my knees, and I'm going to shift my hips back as my hips go back and down, all right? So there's nothing excessive happening there. Same thing for overhead presses, all right? If you're somebody who goes overhead and you naturally kind of see that your tailbone starts to kind of tuck backwards, then you may be somebody who needs to exaggerate and pay attention to tucking underneath you for overhead presses. But if you notice that your hips do what they're supposed to and they stay in that position, you can maintain that position for overhead presses too. Now, for planks, what we do ask is that you maintain a straight line from the neck through the hips to whatever's touching the ground, whether that's your toes or your knees. So here, you might hear the term flat back or straight line, but that doesn't mean that we're asking you to do anything excessive here in the lumbar area. We simply want you to be able to put a broom, and that broom is going to hit the top of your neck, your hips, and your heels right here. If I were tucked up like this, or if I had excessive curvature anywhere, whether I'm sagging or piking, then as you can see, that broom wouldn't be able to hit all of those 3 points of contact. So sometimes you're going to hear an instructor or a trainer tell you the words flat back in those different movements, but what they really mean is they're seeing you starting to arch your back, and they want you to contract your abs and bring your hips back underneath you into more of a neutral position. So for most of the movements that you know of that we really want you to focus on when it comes to osteo, those movements are going to require a neutral spine. So now let's talk about the movements where we might actually want to do a tilt. So when are we going to do a posterior pelvic tilt as opposed to maintaining a neutral spine? Well, first off, let's define what that posterior pelvic tilt looks like. So if I stand from the side, once again, standing up nice and tall and just letting my hips relax the way they are. A posterior pelvic tilt means that the top part of my pelvis, I am going to try to angle it back towards me, while the bottom part of my pelvis is going to come forward, okay? So if you were to take your hands on your glutes and hands in front of you, what you're gonna do is the glute hand is gonna push forward, while the hand in front of you is going to round underneath, okay? Think of your tailbone, the very, very bottom of your sacrum, that little tail part. Think of it actually coming more underneath you and almost coming towards the front of your body, okay? That is what we call a posterior pelvic tilt. That positioning is really important for a lot of movements when we come down to the ground, okay? Especially when we're on our backs or if we're doing anything from a quadruped position. The main reason there is because as you're fighting gravity, we want to make sure that you are protecting your lumbar vertebrae. So if we come down to the ground and let's say we're doing something like a dead bug. So from the ground, I've got my knees directly over my hips and I've got my arms directly over my shoulders. In order to do a dead bug, we ask that you lower one arm and the opposite leg. But before we do that, I'm gonna give you the cue to flatten your back. I may even tell you the cue, push your back into the floor. The reason we're doing that is we're activating the deep core muscles and once again, protecting your lumbar spine from gravity. If you were to maintain your natural curvature of the lumbar spine while you do this, you're gonna get excessive arching of your back, and we're really gonna be compressing that lumbar spine in almost a dangerous way. So we wanna make sure that we're keeping the lumbar spine nice and safe. So once again, knees over hips, arms over, and I'm going to lower one arm, the opposite leg, pushing my low back into the ground as I perform that move. So this is one where we're not doing a neutral spine, we are actually performing that pelvic tilt. Another move where we want you to perform that pelvic tilt is going to be an alternating bird dog. So this one is going to be from a quadruped position. I've got both hands on the ground, my wrists line up with my shoulders, and my knees are going to line up with my hips from this position. Now, when you're in this position, we don't want a rounded back and we don't want the sag, okay? So for most people, we do need to perform that pelvic tilt just to make sure that we maintain a flat back and a straight line from our neck down to our hips, okay? From here, you're gonna maintain that tilt as you lift one arm and the opposite leg, let them hover for about a second, bring them back to the center, and then you repeat on the other side. So once again, I am trying to maintain that tilt, just a little bit of a tilt, as I lift arms and legs. You can always modify this move and do arms only or legs only as you're getting used to it. But those are a couple of examples where doing a pelvic tilt is actually going to protect your spine in doing the movement. It also activates those deep core muscles, which help with not only core stability, but also the strengthening of your pelvic floor. So just keep in mind, the vast majority of the moves that we want you to do, simply maintain your neutral spine. But if you're coming down to the ground to do things like either dead bug or alternating bird dog, you might want to do that little posterior pelvic tilt to protect your spine even more. And that's it, everybody. I hope this explanation helps you kind of figure out which moves that you're going to just stand up nice and tall and maintain your natural positioning, and which moves that you're actually going to perform the pelvic tilt with. As always, if you've got any questions or comments, make sure you put them below, and I will see you next week for another hot topic.